What is going on, guys? Carter here with Edge Mindset. Today we are going to be talking about selling knives. How do you value knives? What are the things that are factored in when you're trying to determine what to list your knives for? Some of this stuff is really basic, right? But that's fine because I get questions all the time. People send me messages, people send me emails saying, hey, I've got this knife. What do you think the value is? And it's always kind of difficult because it's never simple, right? It's never simple as saying that's $235. There's a lot of factors that come into play when you're pricing a knife. Even if you know kind of what the value range is, when you're trying to come up with a what do you list it for, there's things to pay attention to. So I'm going to get into that on the last half of this video. I'm going to talk more specific pricing and things like that. But the first half of the video, I just kind of want to talk about knives in general and why, it's complicated, but why things are valued the way they are. So I've got an array of knives here. I've got a plethora. I don't know if this qualifies as a plethora, but they represent kind of different interesting things that I want to point out with these knives in terms of values and how to determine them, right? So, and in this first part, in fact, maybe this whole video is really for newer people in the knife world, but I think a lot of it applies to people that maybe stepped away for a while and or just never did a lot of buying and selling and things like that. So looking at these knives to a novice, you may think these are all somewhat comparable in terms of like cool factor and things like that. But they absolutely have completely different values. So when you're talking about what makes a knife valuable, or what drives the resale, that's what we're talking about here, not retail. We're talking resale, right? So secondary market. What drives higher secondary market prices? Really, it's the intersection of demand and scarcity. You have to have both of those things. Now it's like a sliding, that's my sliding scale, meaning you could have super high demand and slider scarcity and get a higher value. You could have really high scarcity and lower demand, and it would have a high value, or they could kind of be equal and you'd have a high value. But anywhere that these kind of slide together, it's going to reduce or increase the value more or less. So if we're looking at something like this Mick Strider custom right here. Now, I'm not talking table price, right? Because this is expensive at the table buying new. I'm talking the inflated price that this knife has on the secondary market. So if you were to buy something like this directly from Mick Strider, you're going to pay price A. Now, if you wanted, if you were so inclined, you could then turn around and sell it to somebody else directly for more money. You could make more money, even right away. Now, some knives will do that too, but just not right away. Maybe this XHD right here, XHD7 from Emerson. If you were to buy this knife, we'll talk more about this here soon. If you were to buy this knife retail and you decide you wanted to sell it, you could maybe get your money back right away. Or if you held on to it, kept it nice and minty, a year from now, 2 years from now, you could maybe make some money on it. Now, it's up to you if that makes any sense if you're trying to do that. Most people in the knife community, despite what you might be seeing, aren't really in this to like flip and sell money, right? When most people are wanting to know like what the resale value of something is, it's not because they're trying to be like a secondhand reseller. They just know themselves. Like that's how I am. So I care about the resale value of knives. Sorry, going on a little bit of a tangent here. I care about the resale value of knives because I know that I get into different things. I like to buy new things. I like to show new things. And part of that is selling. So when I buy something, I like to at least be aware of if I were to move this item, would I take a loss? If so, how much? Could I make a couple bucks? That impacts kind of my willingness to buy sometimes. Because as much as I like the idea of having a static collection that I just keep forever, the reality is my collection is growing and shrinking and shifting and changing all the time. It's part of the hobby. I can't just keep accumulating stuff. That would be even more insane than what I'm doing now. And I think a lot of people see my channel and they assume I keep everything. And that I've got like just a room full. I've got way too many knives than any one person should have. But it's not like as much as maybe people think. I have to sell, move, trade all the time in order to get new stuff in. So for example, a knife like this, you have both of those factors, right? It's in demand because Striders are just in demand. And I could do a whole video. In fact, I kind of did do a whole video on why Striders are so collectible and so in demand. And then also scarcity, right? Because this is a mixed Strider custom. It's one guy. He can only make so many of these. So it's a true limited knife. It's not artificially limited, meaning, Microtech, which, by the way, this was sent in by I can't really show it. I tried to set up my camera so this was in the background. It just didn't work. But this is a cool Microtech display case that a viewer sent in to me as appreciation, which is insanely awesome. Thank you so much if you're watching this. I absolutely love it. I've got it plugged in. I can see it. Like I said, I wanted to. You can see some of the red on here. That's cool. I wanted to put it in frame. There's just no way to do it and still have an effective kind of tabletop knife thing. So maybe I'll be able to figure it out. But for now, it's lit up in the background there. So back to what I was saying. So Microtech will do artificial scarcity, right? They'll manufacture, we're going to do a certain edition of a knife. There's only going to be 200 made, right? So they can make more. They're just not making more on purpose. Whereas something like this is literally, I hate saying literally, it's an actual constraint, right? Mick can only physically grind and put together so many knives a year. And it can fluctuate more or less depending on how busy he is and whatever. But this is not a production knife, so it's not something where they can just say, hey, you know what, we're going to double the number we originally thought we were going to do. So it's an actual limited numbered knife, which also drives the value of knives, right? Is it truly limited because the operation can only produce so much, or is it limited arbitrarily? Like this knife here, they made 50 in this configuration for this model, for the integral, but that was an arbitrary number. They could have did 100. They could have made 200, 300, 400. They could have made however many they wanted because Riot can make as many knives, within reason, as Chavez wanted to, but they picked 50, and that's kind of we're making 50 in this exact El Chicano configuration for the Sangre Street Integral, right? And they'll do another 50 in every single kind of model tweak that they do, but it's a value they decided on, not a value that's limited to what could be made, if that makes sense. So that helps drive up value. Something like this has fluctuating demand. So when this is first announced, demand is up. Scarcity is low, right? Because they make enough of these. Scarcity is low, demand's up. That means that the price of a knife like this, when it's released, is kind of higher, right? So if you were to buy this when it's released and immediately try to sell it, you could recoup most of your money, possibly make all your money back. But the longer this sits out there, demand is going to drop on this, and you're going to get less and less. And you'll find that in the knife world. It's kind of an interesting thing. You'll have these drops and everybody's freaking out about it. People are posting about how mad they are they weren't able to get one of these, and sometimes they get really upset about, the website crashed or they didn't know about the drop and they always miss out. And then you'll immediately be like, oh, well, actually, I'm wanting to sell mine. I'll put it up for sale. Surely I'll be able to get my money back because so many people were upset that they missed it and nobody will buy it. Right? And you lower the price, no one will buy it. So there's a huge FOMO thing, and buyers like the idea of drops, and they prefer the idea of buying from a retailer for some reason. Even if it doesn't make logical sense, right? Even if you're like, well, I got this from ChavezKnives.com. I literally opened it, checked it out. It's brand new. Nobody wants to buy it, but they would have gladly bought it from the Chavez website. So there is some interesting human factors involved in knife buying. Same as Striders, people will throw money at drops like it's nobody's business, and then you go to sell it right after because maybe you shouldn't have bought it. Maybe you decided you didn't actually like it, and then all of a sudden you can't even sell the thing, and you got to lower the price and lower the price. So there is some interesting human characteristics that come into this too, right? Because at the end of the day, these are not this isn't food. This isn't gasoline. This isn't something needed for life. It's a fun commodity. It's a hobby thing. So it follows a lot of the same retail, resale things that other life stuff does, but then it also kind of has its own rules because it's not actually a needed item. Now this one's kind of the same thing, right? So this was pretty popular when it dropped, but if you try to sell this right now, demand's going to be kind of low because people just saw that these were listed. A lot of people just passed on it. And so if you were to post this for sale on the secondary market, you probably wouldn't be able to get much traction. Maybe you could get your money back if you're patient. Otherwise, you might have to go a little bit below retail to encourage people that didn't buy this at the drop to buy it. This lasted about a day or so, maybe 36 hours, and these were sold out. So not insane, not like Strider drops that sell out in an hour or two, sometimes faster. This one kind of hung out a little bit, and so you're going to see kind of that demand wane on initial drop. Like I said, it gets kind of complicated, and it's difficult to understand. It's like the stock market, right? Like you think you understand it, and you think, I thought this was going to be huge in demand. I bought 2 of them stupidly. Once again, not because I wanted to flip one. It just seemed like I've been wanting one of these so long. They don't pop up very often. I'm like, oh, I got to get 2. Like it was a stupid, quick decision. Oh, I got to get 2. Who knows when I'm going to see them again. But I did think that these were going to sell out really, really fast, and they hung out quite a bit longer than I expected. Something like this, I think the point I want to make with this guy is when we talk about scarcity and demand, a knife like this, which I don't even know what this knife is called. This is like the unnamed knife from a company called Swordsmith, I guess. Really amazing knife. Very, very affordable. Zirconium inlays, Zircuti pocket clip and backspacer that I've done monochrome finish on. M390 blade steel, hand rubbed. It's got a ruby in it for like $300. So scarcity is really high. This is not a common knife. In fact, most people have never even seen or heard of this. I've only seen it available from one retailer that resells like interesting Chinese made knives. I'm sure it's around elsewhere, but this is not a knife that was actually distributed in the US through any sort of major channels, right? It's something that wasn't really sold here, and it's not from a brand that has a presence here. So this is very, very, I hate to say rare, but very non-common knife. However, demand's super low because nobody knows what it is. Nobody's seeking this knife. So you could take the stance of like, ooh, this is a super rare knife. It's got to be worth a lot of money. No, rarity alone does not equal an in-demand knife that's worth a lot of money. There's tons of companies that have came and gone. You could find knives from the 90s, the 2000s, that nobody's ever even heard of. And guess what? Nobody cares. So it's that intersection of demand and rarity, scarcity, that drives up that value. You can't have just scarcity and drive up the value. However, you can have extreme demand and drive up the value. So even if, but the other interesting thing is you can't really have high demand if scarcity doesn't exist, because if it's not scarce, then it's plentiful, which means demand isn't high. So it's it's not as simple as I explained before, but it is interdependent on those two things to determine what the value is. So, and the reason I bring this up is I had an individual reach out to me with a Strider. I'm not going to say the name. With a Strider, he thought he had a rare SNG configuration, thought it was probably worth X. He wanted my opinion, and I had to kind of break it to him that it's probably worth about half of what he's thinking. So really, really far off. And you know, he got to his line of thinking because technically the configuration he had, it wasn't a custom, it was an SNG. The configuration he had was kind of technically rare, right? The front scale with the back lock side, it was technically not that common, I guess is what I'll say. However, it's not desired. It's not in demand. Nobody's looking for it. Nobody will pay any extra money for it. And it's essentially really, the bottom of the barrel in terms of SNG value for Striders. But if you weren't super aware of the market, the Strider market, things like that, you probably wouldn't have any idea about it. So let's get into the second half. I've yapped way too long. Holy crap, I wasn't expecting to spend 15 minutes. So when we get into price values, all right, let's get into brass tacks here. Let's say, let's say we call this guy $200 to $300 value. Let's say we call this guy $600 to $700 value. These are somewhat arbitrary, not completely. I mean, they're fairly realistic. Let's say let's say this one is 2,200 to 3,000, right? On this guy right here. We'll just do those three. We'll do these three. So what does that mean? What does that range mean? Like when somebody gives you a range. So if I ever give you a range and say, here's what I think this value is. Typically, I mean, there's a small part of it that is, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the knife market, any market, is willing to do right now. There's a lot of different factors. Like, for example, at the time of publishing this video, the economy's on a downturn. People are not spending as much. They're a little bit nervous, layoffs, things like that. We're also heading into the holiday season. People are focused on, presents for their family and travel for holiday and food and all that kind of stuff. So now, just baseline, it's going to be kind of pushing towards that lower end more than likely. But the biggest determining factor of where in the range does your knife fit, right? Like, so this one here, $500 to $600 or $600 to $700. How do I know if it's if I'm going to get closer to 6 or closer to 7, or if I'm going to even bleed up or down? A lot of it comes down to how and where you post the knife. Is this something you're just reaching out to a few people with? Is this something that you're only posting on bladeforums.com? Or are you doing a full-scale campaign, marketing campaign? Are you listing this everywhere you think that you possibly can? Are you listing it in Facebook groups? Are you listing it on Blade Forums, USN? Are you putting it on Blade Binge, which I want to talk about that as well? Are you putting it on Reddit Knife Swap? Are you covering all your bases? Also, quality of photos, information, and video. May not seem like that big of a deal, but it really is. Like, good photos sell product, and explaining things up front helps sell products. There's been lots of knives that I've had some interest in, but there's no description. Maybe there's no pictures of lockup. There's no description of like what the history of the knife is. And there's part of me that's like, well, I could reach out to him and get that information. But then I'm like, there might be something there I don't like. And then I got to like kind of unwind it. And I just don't even want to get into it if I'm not more confident. And so by having more photos, description, story, explaining as much as you possibly can, you will make people more confident to engage with you. You'll pull out those people that are kind of interested, and they'll take that next step, which will help kind of push that sale. And of course, good photos, good video always does an amazing thing. Number 2, which could be just as important as number 1, it's arguable. In fact, maybe more important. It's patience. How quickly are you wanting to sell it? That's usually like when I give a range to somebody to say what I think the value is, that's usually what's driving most of that range. If you want to sell it in a couple days, it's got to be on that low end. If you want to sell it on that high end, it might take you a couple months. Depending on the model, like this knife right here, right now, not super in demand. They just did a drop. A lot of people that wanted this was able to get it, buy it retail. But guess what? In a couple months, there might be somebody who kind of took some time off and they realized that they missed this drop, or maybe somebody that stepped away from Emerson or coming back in, or somebody that's new to Emerson's, didn't even know this existed. All of a sudden, they're like, holy crap, I didn't know this was a thing. I got to get me one of these. Finding that person that's willing to pay $700 for a knife that you can't just go out and buy right now might take a couple months. So that's up to you to decide how quickly do you want to move the thing. Everybody wants the high level price and they want to sell it today, but that's not the realistic way to do pricing, right? It doesn't work that way. You can't get the high price and the speed typically. Now you could luck out. You could post this up and there could be that. You only need one person to buy your knife. There could be that person that's just kicking himself because he went on vacation, he missed it, and he's willing to scoop it up. It's possible, but the more likely scenario is if you want the higher price, you got to be patient. You got to re-up the ad. You got to keep it going, right? You got to update your timestamps, whatever you got to do to keep those postings active, and then maybe you'll be able to sell that knife. The other thing to keep in mind, times be a-changin', right? Nothing lasts forever. Things are finite. Another example, somebody reached out today with an email asking about value on a Rizzuto Estilano Milano, which is an old automatic stiletto style knife. They were made in, I believe, Japan. They were sold in Mexico in like the 80s. And there was a time when they were highly, highly collectible, right? Like there was a lot of older There was a lot of people that were kids in the 80s that went to Mexico with their family. They bought or saw those knives, and then they grew up and got disposable money, and they wanted to collect those knives. And so there was a time, like maybe 10 years ago, when these Estelano Milanos were, pretty popular and people collected them. But times have kind of changed. That subgenre of knife collecting has continued to shrink. I'm not saying they don't exist still. I'm not saying there's not people that collect them. But the amount of people that are collecting that specific knife has kind of shrunk. And the younger people coming into the knife world, they don't have that same connection to that knife. They weren't around in the 80s. They didn't see these. They don't have that draw to it. So to them, it's just a cheap plastic switchblade. And, they wouldn't pay $300-400 for the thing. And that's something to keep in mind as well. Like I said, there's lots of knives that were highly collectible in the 2000s that aren't collectible anymore. There were knives that were collectible in the 90s, the 80s, right? All the way back. Eventually, knives usually turn to dust, right? Just like everything else. Brands stop, people die, things quit being made. And for a while, it can increase the amount of people wanting to get it. But eventually, this is going to get depressing. We all perish. We all go away. Like, Emerson knives. Like, eventually, they're probably not going to be much more than a distant memory to a handful of people, right? And I know that's kind of morbid and kind of extreme, but it happens all the time. There's lots of knives that I kind of collected in my early knife career or saw that I thought were cool, and now nobody even knows what they are, right? There's only a handful of people that really understand them. And that's just the nature of the beast, in with the old, in with the new, out with the old. It's part of it as well. And the reason I bring that up is don't let your collecting get on top of you, right? Like, don't think that these are investments, right? They're for fun. They're for hobby. Buy the things you want. Hold on to the things you want. But don't think that you're like, I have no delusion. I'm not investing in Strider knives, right? And it makes me nervous when I start accumulating too many and I have too much tied into it. Because at any time, that value that I'm so confident with can be disrupted. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, we're seeing it with the knife market going down, but there could also be more specific things. Something could happen with the company, bad press. They could close up shop again, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, I don't want these anymore. They're not supporting it. They're not providing warranty services, and so they flood the market, and it drives the prices down, and then new people aren't coming in. So don't be confused with this video. Buying knives is not a valid investment, right? You can do it if you know what you're doing and you're really focused on the business side. You can buy knives and sell them, especially if you get into like custom knife makers where you are placing orders for knives that are years and years out from being made. You can resell those, right? There's plenty of knife sellers that do that, but you really have to decide, are you going to be in the business of knife curating and selling, or are you a hobbyist? Now, the point of this video is if you're going to be a hobbyist, just trying to do it as smart as possible so that it's not just a big money pit. Because if it's a big money pit, you're probably going to get frustrated and leave the hobby. So if you do it in a smart way, if you buy things correctly, if you understand their values, it can lessen the pain if you need to sell things and recoup some funds. All right, comment down below. Did this video help anybody at all? Did it provide any insight? Please give your comments and all those things. I want to hear from you guys. Take care. I'm out.